The Ringer's music critic Rob Harvilla curates and explores 60 iconic songs from the 90s that define the decade. Rob is joined by a variety of guests to break it all down as they turn back the clock. Check out 60 Songs That Explain the 90s exclusively on Spotify.
This episode is brought to you by Cheerios Oat Crunch. Make a good morning great with Cheerios Oat Crunch Almond, topped with whole grain oats and sliced almonds. It's a breakfast your whole family will love. Pick up a box of new Cheerios Oat Crunch Almond at your local grocery store.
This episode is brought to you by Vroom. Skip the nightmare of a car dealership and get back to terrifying tales you actually like with Vroom. All you need is your phone, and soon you're browsing thousands of cars from your couch, a park, or literally anywhere else. You also get the price instantly, and you never have to haggle with pushy salesmen. So the next time you need to buy a car, just grab your phone, go to vroom.com, and check out thousands of great cars.
David, you got married this weekend.
I did.
How does it feel to be a married man?
It feels fantastic. People listening to this can't see me grinning ear to ear, but yeah, you know, we had a fantastic time. You know, this thing started out as basically just like an excuse to throw a big family party post-COVID, and then COVID came back. But, you know, we threw a careful party nonetheless, all outdoors and distanced and everything else. But it was absolutely just the most amazing weekend. I mean, just the most amazing day. But it started early and kept going. It was fantastic, man. Brian, you were there. I'm grateful for your presence, for your speech,
my goodness,
which we will be playing in full at the end of this episode. And that's not true. And it's crazy because everybody knows. I mean, everybody who knows me, and maybe I think I said it last time on the show, knows that this was. I mean, I've been sort of functionally married for a long time, right? We have 2 kids. We have a house. We have a very married life, as you beautifully pointed out in your speech. But, just like with everything that comes with marriage and fatherhood, you're never quite prepared for the sort of magic of the moment, right? And just like how sort of overwhelmingly wonderful these things can be. So it was just an amazing time.
You were caught up in it.
I was caught up, man. I was certainly caught up. Shed a few tears in front of lots of people, but you know what?
Yeah, you want to tell the folks at home how many times you
how many times
I
broke down?
Speech? I would say 7, maybe.
Within the one speech. Yeah. I mean, if you count each
it was beautiful.
Break as its own thing, yeah, it was sort of just for me. It started in at a certain point in the service, and just sort of. Was in the back of my throat for the rest of the night, but it was you could probably count them out. It might be more than 7.
Yeah, it was gorgeous. It was incredibly touching. I think my official count would be like 7 tear ups and maybe 2 hard cries during the speech, right? Like I just need a moment before I can continue here.
Yeah.
But it was great. We'll also be releasing that, folks, as a bonus pod later in the week.
Yeah, that's a great idea. My favorite part, and this, I don't know, I think I mentioned this to you before you spoke, but I think both in the preparation for it, when they sort of put the order of speeches together, both when it came to you and when it came to me, there was this constant refrain from my wife and anybody else involved. It's like, well, they'll be fine. They're public speakers. And I don't know what point in our podcasting career we've gone from just like 2 dudes with a recording device to professional public speakers. But I guess we're there, at least as far as everybody else is concerned.
Have these people heard the press box?
Yeah, certainly not.
Before it gets edited, at least. No. Couple other notes. First of all, the church you guys picked was a great, beautiful old Baptist church. I thought that was really, really cool, really intimate place. The good Reverend Dr. Stephen Shoemaker did a fabulous job marrying you guys. That was so cool.
Now he is a professional public speaker, so he should have done a good job.
He knows what he's doing. Yeah, he was absolutely at ease. Dom looked beautiful.
Oh my God,
so amazing to see her and see her reaction and how happy she was. We did get a couple of tweets about this, one of which I wanted to read. This is from, because I put a picture up on the press box Twitter feed of the 2 of us at the after party. This was from listener Ben Alschuler, reacted this way, called it a photo of Michael Stipe and Woj about to eat an entire pizza dipped in chocolate.
That was the
reaction.
Totally inaccurate. Yeah.
Well, we did a fact check, Ben, and it turns out 2 Pinocchios, that was a Nutella pizza. from the dessert buffet. That was not a pizza dipped in chocolate. But the bit about David and I looking like Michael Stipe and Woj, fact check true. That checks out.
I've gotten every bald man. I mean, I've had a shaved head for a very, very long time. And over the years, I've gotten compared to every man with a shaved head probably in existence. Michael Stipe is fine. Michael Stipe's he's an attractive fellow, I think. So I'll go with that.
You were the happiest bald man on the face of the planet on Saturday night, and I was so happy to see it. What a day. We will remember that for a long time. Coming up on today's show, David, it's Bob Woodward week in America. He's got a new book with Robert Costa called Peril. What's it like to be interviewed for one of these Woodward blockbuster books? We explain. Plus, should a Washington Post writer's statement to Politico be off the record if she sent it via email and declared it so? And should you pay a sports writer to come on your podcast? David and I will be the judge of that. All that and more on the Press Box, a part of the Ringer Podcast Network. Hello, media consumers. Brian Curtis and David Shoemaker of the Ringer here, along with producer Lonnie Ronaldo. It's a big week in publishing, David. Bob Woodward is releasing a news cycle. A new book. A new book. It's very easy to get him confused when it comes to Bob Woodward. The new book written with his Washington Post teammate Robert Costa is Peril. Peril. No subtitle. Remember the press box rule of publishing. The surest sign you're a big deal in book world is if your nonfiction books don't come with subtitles.
Right.
You don't have to explain. Just one word. That's it. No enticements necessary.
No, I mean, there will be, supplementary copy available online for anyone that needs it. But as long as you got a couple, president's faces on there and Bob Woodward's name, Robert Costa to boot, I think you kind of get the point across.
You get the point across. Now, I have been reading Peril in between wedding speeches all weekend. And on the plane back here to LA, I got a couple notes for you about the book itself. But first, I'd like to tell you a little bit about the Woodward method of interviewing.
Oh, please.
I was fortunate enough to speak with someone who participated in one of the interviews for Peril, who had some notes about the whole experience. First of all, the interview was at Bob Woodward's house in Georgetown in Washington, D.C., where dinner was served. Just on the one hand, a very far cry from Cub reporter Woodward knocking on people's doors and All the President's Men.
Yeah.
But you can absolutely see the pull of that, right?
For sure.
And making powerful people feel at ease.
Is it a townhouse? Is that what we officially call all of the nice residences in DC, townhouses?
I believe that's correct.
All right, because they're brownstones in New York, but it's a different thing, slightly different thing. But townhouse is sort of also. I'm sure there's a bunch of high rises and not high rises. I'm sure there's new builds in DC, but it seems like once you get to townhouse, you've kind of hit the aspirational peak in Washington world, right? You're not like
sure.
It's not like New York where it's like there is a 15,000 foot penthouse being constructed at any given moment that you might move into someday. Like it's the townhouse is the goal.
That's the gold standard. And if you're somebody like Woodward, come over to my place. No one's going to overhear us here. We'll serve some wine. Everybody will be comfortable. So as I said, dinner was served and the participants said there was a lot of just, casual shooting the shit over the salad course. But then when a subject came up that Woodward wanted to ask about for the book itself, Woodward said something like, that's something I wanted to ask you about. Would you mind if I take out a recorder? None of this is for attribution, of course. I've just been doing it this way for years. Now, I find that really funny because every journalist, including me, has a faux apologetic way of asking the subject if it's okay to turn on a recorder.
Yeah.
I do that several times a week. I'm sorry, would you just mind if I go and record this for my notes or so I can transcribe it later? It's just something you kind of reflexively say. This is Bob Woodward. We're over at Bob Woodward's house. Yes, it's okay if you record me. Person who wrote All the President's Men. I'm going to be okay with your decision to do that. I just thought that was really funny. Also notable, both Woodward and Costa, who was also at the interview, had their own recorders. So we are double recording here. We're not just doing one transcript, we are double recording.
All right. That makes me very interested about the process, but I guess we can kind of circle back around to that later. I think that's interesting.
There was something notable about the way Woodward and Costa asked questions. Woodward was the guy who wheedles the anecdote out of you. Oh, tell me more about that. Oh, what's going on with that? Tell me about what you were feeling, kind of thing, right? He's pulling the anecdote out of you.
Mm-hmm.
Costa, on the other hand, is the guy who was nailing everything down about the anecdote.
He's the details guy.
Right. When did this happen? Was this before or after this event? Now, where exactly was this? It was almost like Costa was Matthew McConaughey in True Detective with the big board behind him, with all the stuff about the Yellow King. Like, he just had everything in his mind about events and dates just perfectly laid out. So he's trying to place it in a giant timeline of other reporting and facts he already knows. And that was the difference between the approaches of the two.
So it was the infamous good cop, meticulous cop routine.
Yeah, exactly. Good cop. Wait, what's the date of that cop?
Yeah.
Yes, that was very much the dynamic. Also, we mentioned this last week. It's just funny to think of Robert Costa as a complimentary piece here because he is such a big deal at the Washington Post.
Yeah.
On his own. He was the moderator of Washington Week for a while. It's almost like when Carmelo Anthony plays on the Dream Team.
Right.
He's still mellow. You just see him in a different context.
Do you think
because
that
he's next to LeBron or next to whomever?
Do you think that Costa's going to come out of this with a different reputation? We'll just call it's like Olympics Mello. It'll be like Peril Costa. And now whenever he writes a single byline story, people are going to just be complaining like, I wish we could get back to Peril Costa. That was really the apex. He's never really played good defense after that. I don't understand why.
I don't think he needed the career reboot like Mello did. I don't think we were in Can Costa ever win the big one territory. I was interested in whether after a juicy nugget was dispensed, if Woodward and Costa kind of gave each other like a little look, a half look over like, eyebrow raised. Did you hear that? Apparently that did not happen because they were actually professional journalists.
Yeah.
I did also have one Woodwardian detail about what was served for dessert.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because if you're Woodward, right?
Was it a Nutella pizza?
Here. It was not a Nutella pizza or a chocolate pizza for that matter. It was rhubarb pie.
Oh.
Rhubarb pie.
Like a Whole Foods rhubarb pie? Like, I assume you can purchase a rhubarb pie at some fine Washington area grocer.
So I can't prove that either way, but I'm guessing Bob Woodward is not hurriedly ripping off the plastic. I'm going to really guess this was an absolutely fresh made rhubarb pie.
Okay.
That's all I got before we talk about the book itself. But I thought that was fascinating as a small window, as they say, into the reporting process.
Yeah. But they did a million of these interviews, but one would assume that they all had a pretty similar organizational scheme.
Yeah, I think so. I think Bob Woodward's got it down pat at this point.
I think so too. It'd be interesting to hear what their sort of, locker room session was before the first one, or maybe their locker room session after the first one. Sort of get the game plan, smoothed out. But that's really interesting.
And we didn't need to know this about Bob Woodward, but just as a sign of journalistic power that you go to Bob Woodward, it's pretty amazing.
Sure. You go to Bob Woodward. Well, not just you go to Bob Woodward, but you go to Bob Woodward's townhouse for dinner and rhubarb pie. I mean, that's how do you say no to that?
And I'm sure that's been the case for a really long time now.
Mm-hmm.
But that's just, I think I told you once that the ultimate sign of journalistic power I ever saw is when Michael Lewis profiled Obama for Vanity Fair. And all the pictures in the magazine were of Obama with Michael Lewis.
Oh, yeah. I remember that. It's great. It
was like, okay, well, we have Obama, the president of the United States, but the photos need to feature the author because the author is such a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
This is right. This may not be that just amazing, but it is right up there. You go to Bob Woodward for the interviews.
Yeah. I mean, listen, with the Obama thing, I mean, so your take is 100% right. There might be, a tinge if you're the magazine of saying, well, this is a way to make sure it looks like it's clear that we got a photo exclusive as well as a written exclusive, right? These aren't just stock photos of Obama in the Oval Office or in his office or wherever else. You're placed with the author in the moment. I don't really know what the corollary is with Woodward, but yeah, I'm sure there's some of that in there too.
Couple notes about the book itself that I think you'll find entertaining. It's as much about Biden, or almost as much about Biden, as it is about Trump. You and I have talked about how do you get around this idea of Trump book after Trump book after Trump book.
Mm-hmm.
Well, one way is to make them almost, not quite, but almost alternating chapters. A Biden chapter, a Trump chapter. A Biden chapter, a Trump chapter. I thought that was really interesting. There is the Woodward thing, which anybody who's read any of his books now has come to know, where it's like, oh, wow, Mark Milley, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, is not quoted directly, like told Bob Woodward and Bob Costa, but it is we are narrating tons of events from Mark Milley's particular day here. Mm-hmm. So the source for this is either him or people who very intimately know him. It's like that with AG Bill Barr. It's like that with Mike Pence, kind of surprisingly. But just watching that sort of journalistic style, not for attribution, but if you read it, you're like, well, it's we get the point here. Or let's say you can make some inferences.
So yeah, it's either somebody with intimate knowledge of, or I guess access to Mark Milley's iPhone, or the man himself.
Yeah, it's a very small pool of people. One thing that was notable about Woodward and Costa's prose, and this has again been pretty notable about Woodward for a long time, is it's just scene. There's none of the usual connective journalistic tissue.
Mm-hmm.
Where you sort of go back and explain like some context about Donald Trump, or some context about, let's say, why the vice president of the United States presides over the counting of electoral votes.
Uh-huh.
Like, normally authors go scene, boom, section break, plant your foot and say, the founding fathers would have hardly recognized what Mike Pence was expected to do on January 6th.
Right.
And then have a long kind of discursive section and then go back to the scene, partly because they don't have as much material as Woodward does, and also partly because that helps sort of center the reader on what the hell is going on and give them a bit of history and everything like that.
Yeah.
There is none of that in Bob Woodward's books. It is just powerful person doing this, powerful person doing this, powerful person doing this.
Right. It's an accumulation of data. I guess the inclusion or exclusion of information probably helps shape the narrative to some extent, but it's not, there's no flourish to it.
Yeah. It reads like commercial fiction. And in fact, it is in a way commercial nonfiction at a high level. Like you're reading a paperback airport novel.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
That's the feel of it. Like a thing happened and then another thing happened and then another thing happened. You're just like, whoa. Again, with none of that kind of just stopping and pausing and letting the reader kind of be like, okay, I'm learning something about the Constitution or whatever it is. It's really interesting. I will say, though, that the set piece about the events of January 6th of this year and the sacking of the U.S. Capitol, which is about halfway through the book, is pretty incredible. In fact, it's incredible, full stop. A lot of it is about Mike Pence and what he was doing on that day and his whole sort of, all the days before where he's trying to talk to Trump and Trump is trying to get him basically to help him steal the election. That whole section of the book is incredible. And it really rewards the Woodward method of, this is what a powerful person was doing, and this is what a powerful person was doing, and this is what a powerful person was doing. Because you want to know what all these people were doing.
Of course.
On January 6th.
Mm-hmm.
It's awesome. And, again, Woodward's not going to be somebody who's going to be talking about the Proud Boys or something like that. He's going to be going right to the people who are running the government.
Right.
It is a news cycle. As I said, David, they're going to be on the Late Show tomorrow.
Wow.
Already on the interview circuit.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of them.
A whole bunch of interviews. I also wanted to give you a few tastes of the Bob Woodward literary style.
Oh, please.
Because in addition to not just having connective tissue, Bob Woodward is not and has never been interested in doing long descriptions of people.
Uh-huh.
You know, certain authors would stop and be like, I'm just going to have a whole paragraph here about what Mitch McConnell looks like.
Right.
Or what it sounds like to be in Mitch McConnell's presence. How does he talk? What does his office look like? What does he do when people walk through the door?
Mm-hmm.
Just a little literary flourish.
Yeah.
Bob Woodward is totally disinterested in that. But he is sometimes compelled to include like 3 or 4 words about the way someone looks. So Paul Ryan, for instance, former Speaker of the House.
Yeah.
Very prominent figure that everybody knows. Listen to the way he is described when he first appears in the book. Ryan, comma, a tall, dark-haired Midwesterner, comma. Now, is it really going to help us to understand something about Paul Ryan to tell us that he is a dark-haired Midwesterner?
Well, okay, no, absolutely not. Except, well, you can keep going, but this is based on very little information. It being almost entirely like dialogue-driven scenes of the things happening and descriptions like tall, dark-haired Midwesterner makes it sound like we're reading a movie script instead of a nonfiction book.
It really does read that way a lot of the time. It does, and even though this is, I don't know if this is going to be a movie or not, but it is written with that sense. Like a shooting script as much as, you know, a conventional nonfiction book. When you only have like 1 or 2 adjectives to describe every person, though, sometimes those adjectives are kind of funny or kind of seemingly just a little pointed. I want you to listen to the description of Mike Pompeo, former Secretary of State, when he first appears in the book.
Okay.
Pompeo, comma, heavy and gregarious, comma, with little tolerance for liberals, comma. We need to have a contest where we just like come up with each other's Woodward adjectives.
Oh, that's fantastic. Let's do it. Well, let's do it. Let's do it for next week. Let's have readers write in what their 1 sentence or like 5-word description of each of us is.
Okay. And I think it should be like 2 or 3 adjectives. That's all you get.
All right.
And no metaphors. You can't say David looks like Michael Stipe. That doesn't work, right? That's not the Woodward method. You just have to go very, very basic. But choose your adjectives carefully. Coming up, David, we need to adjudicate the case of Politico versus Jennifer Rubin on what off the record means. Plus, we will ask, should you pay guests for coming on your podcast? But first, let's do the overworked Twitter joke of the week, where we celebrate a gag that was so obvious that all of media Twitter made it at exactly the same time. Send your nominees to @thepressboxpod, where they are always gratefully received. Get a load of this New York Times tweet, David. Quote, as terrible as it is that 1 in 500 Americans have died of COVID, it's still much easier to have gone through the pandemic without having a close friend or family member die of it than it would be if the toll were 1 in 50, says Ross Douthat.
Wait, what?
So I know the tweet is saying, hey, it's terrible that 1 in 500 Americans have died of COVID, but imagine if it was 1 in 50 Americans. That would be worse.
Imagine if it was all of the Americans. Then there'd be no one left to be sad. So, you know, goes both ways.
That, says Ross Douthat. A lot of people made fun of that tweet, but it was an overworked Twitter joke to write at 6'11", Kevin Durant dominates the NBA. But what if he were 60 feet, 11 inches tall? He would be nearly unstoppable, says our panel of experts. Thanks to Lee for pointing us toward that tweet.
That's great.
And finally, David, this is not really our beat, but were you following the Nicki Minaj COVID story?
I was. I'm not sure that's not entire. That might be partially our beat. So let's take a second with it.
So she tweeted that a friend of her cousin's, by the way, just an amazing setup already.
Yeah.
A friend of her cousin's who lives in Trinidad and Tobago, Trinidad specifically, had received the COVID vaccine, but had some side effects. Quoting Nicki Minaj here, his testicles became swollen. His friend was weeks away from getting married. Now the girl called off the wedding. We should note here that authorities in Trinidad said that the claim was false, but this is what she said. Now, there were a lot of tweets comparing Nicki Minaj's cousin's friend and the Patriots and the Deflategate scandal.
Okay.
But it was a superior overworked Twitter joke to write, Between the Met Gala and Nicki Minaj, it sure has been a week for overly inflated balls.
Oh, my God. Imagine how terrible it would have been if two of her cousin's friends in Trinidad had that experience.
Next to HIPAA understander, if you made me speak very carefully during that last joke, congrats. You made the overworked Twitter joke of the week. All right, now time for the notebook dump, David. And listener Victoria Hasid has pointed us to a very interesting story. At the end of last week, we had a classic reporter Twitter dispute involving Politico and Washington Post columnist Jennifer Rubin. This is one of those where every reporter you know winds up weighing in at some point. We even got Maggie Haberman over the weekend to weigh in.
Mm-hmm.
When journalists get pissed at each other, David, I believe there's only one place we can take the case. I introduce you to a new feature, Journalism Small Claims Court. This episode is brought to you by Cheerios Oat Crunch. The rhythm for your family's day starts with breakfast, but it can be hard to set a positive tempo when your routine gets hectic. Make a good morning great with Cheerios Oat Crunch Almond topped with whole grain oats and sliced almonds. It is a breakfast your whole family will love. With an extra crunchy crunch, you'll feel the beat in every bite, filling you with positivity to turn a good morning into a great day. Try new Cheerios Oat Crunch Almond by picking up a box at your local grocery store. Also available in cinnamon or oats and honey.
This episode is brought to you by Odoo. Running a business is hard, but who says you have to do it alone? With Odoo's suite of business applications, you can streamline, automate, and simplify any part of your company. They've got apps for CRM, accounting, e-commerce, manufacturing, you name it. Each app is user-friendly, intuitive, and fully integrated, so you can stop wasting time and start growing your business. Productivity awaits with Odoo. For a free trial, go to odoo.com/Spotify. That's odoo.com/Spotify.
This episode is brought to you by HP. Whenever you do your best thinking, the HP Spectre X360 is ready when inspiration strikes. With power save for battery life and focus mode to multitask, you can do your best thinking whenever and wherever it happens. You can't always schedule when and where you might have a brilliant thought, whether it's in the morning or before bed, when you're at your computer or away from it. Thinking can happen anywhere and anytime. The HP Spectre X360 2-in-1 convertible PC with Windows 10 saves battery life for whenever an idea hits you. HP Spectre X360, a more thoughtful laptop.
That music brings back so many memories.
It does. It's fantastic. It's fantastic music.
I can see Rusty the Bailiff sitting here on the Zoom call with us right now. All right, David, the plaintiff in our first case is Washington Post columnist Jennifer Rubin, or at least people that support Washington Post columnist Jennifer Rubin. Rubin was the subject of a Politico story last Thursday that charted her journey from conservative Barack Obama critic to never Trumper to finally what Politico calls the Biden administration's favorite columnist.
Oh, my God.
Whose columns are constantly cited around and by people that work in the White House. The defendants in this case, David, Politico writers Alex Thompson and Nick Niedziadek. Oops, let me do that again. Nick Niedziadek. The defendants in this case, David, Politico writers Alex Thompson and Nick Niedziadek, who asked Rubin to comment on their puckish bit of media criticism. As they write, Rubin responded in an email with the subject line, "off the record." Since we never agreed to conduct such an off-the-record conversation, we are publishing it, meaning Rubin's email, below in full. So you see what happened here.
Mm-hmm.
Rubin sends them an email, says, this is off the record, and they say, oh, we never agreed to an off-the-record arrangement here, so we get to print your full email in our piece.
Okay.
Who was right in the matter of Politico v. Rubin?
I'm going to answer your question with a question. Is it not? Okay. Is it not conventional, especially in Washington, to have somebody go on and off the record at a moment's notice by just saying this is off the record?
Sure, it is.
So what's the difference in email if someone's just like what if she had written back on the record and then had a paragraph where she was like, and this is off the record, but would you not be held to that standard?
I think the difference they're talking about is when you are with a person and they say, hey, off the record, and kind of give you a look. And then you are giving them a little nod or a verbal assurance that, yes, it is off the record, which means you have accepted the deal.
Okay.
Whereas if you just say, literally email someone and say off the record, bam, they haven't agreed to any arrangement or even given you a little head nod. So it doesn't count.
Okay. I'm still a little bit uneasy about this. What's your take?
Well, I think they are right on the merits, meaning the Politico reporters.
Mm-hmm.
Because all of these things, and again, there are no hard and fast rules for any of these things, right? These are agreements between reporters and their subjects.
Mm-hmm.
That's all they are. They could conceivably be broken at any time. You do not go to the people's court if you break an off the record agreement with somebody. They may never talk to you again. You may get a bad name, but these are not hard and fast rules. And the thing is they do rely on you to some extent on you making an agreement.
Right.
And it's funny, I get these all the time from brands. They'll send an email and say, hey, Colin Cowherd has a new shampoo debuting on Thursday at 2:30. And there's a whole description that says, by the way, this release is embargoed until then. And I always want to be like, I did not agree to an embargo for Colin Cowherd shampoo.
No.
And if I wanted to just tweet this out right now, I could. And I never do, because then I would actually be advertising the product. And I don't want to do that.
Yeah. Well, and that kind of embargo would lead me to believe that Colin Cowherd shampoo is really bad. And they're just trying to keep that information away from the public until the release day.
They're not screening for critics. So those are always weird to me too, because like I didn't agree to an embargo. What are you talking about? You just sent it out, and that's obviously a low level version of it. I think the thing that happened here doesn't happen very much, because mostly reporters get messages, let's say text or DM or whatever it is, labeled off the record by people they know and have relationships with.
Mm-hmm.
And they are counting on those people to be sources for them. So they are happy to honor by the way, this is off the record message.
Right. And
not say, hey, we never agreed on this, because that person is somebody that they may need to go back to, that they may need to win the trust of.
Well, I don't mean to be pedantic, but it's less the way you describe it. That's not really honoring the off the record agreement, because implicitly they wouldn't honor it otherwise. It's not honoring. There's no agreement to honor, right? It's just they're doing it as a favor. You're creating an agreement. Right. You're post-dating. You are post-dating or predating the agreement that they are invoking. Yes, you're absolutely right. You're doing them a favor. Yeah. Essentially. By not just tweeting out whatever it is. Like, I think, you could imagine a Politico reporter or any reporter in Washington got a note from somebody in Biden world that says, hey, off the record, but there's a good story for you here about these conservative Democrats who are holding up Biden's legislation. Mm-hmm. And you'd be like, oh, there is a good story there. And you wouldn't just go tweet that out. Because there'd be ramifications for tweeting that out. So I think this is one of those things where the rules are absolutely in the Politico guy's favor. The rules, however informal they are, but the practical application matters almost totally about who is doing this. Yeah. In the real world, most of the time. And so, are you going to make a judgment on this case? Do you want me to like bang a gavel or something? Yeah. Well, this is we have a new feature on the show. I think we should have a formal rubric for how this thing ends. So you want us to Judge David and Judge Brian fine for the defendants? Yeah, I think so. I mean, it does seem very weird to me that you would. I think it's less maybe I'm just getting really into the weeds here. I think it bothers me less that they don't feel compelled to abide by a non-existent stipulation, but more that you just sort of like out somebody in an article. Like if you don't believe you're bound by the off the record subject line, then why not include it in context as if it was on the record, as opposed to pulling it out and saying, like putting it on Front Street, right? Just being like, this lady doesn't know how on the record works, so I'm just going to write her a whole email. I'm just going to print her whole email in this thing. I mean, doesn't that seem a little bit like too far in the other direction?
Yeah, maybe it's anticipating that she would then cry foul if you just put it in the article.
Well, that would be correct.
Was off the record, and then you have to defend it at that point. So you're just kind of pre-defending yourself against charges that you had done something wrong. Like, look, I never agreed to anything, and I'm going to go spell that out. I don't know if it's germane to this discussion, to the guilty, not guilty part of this discussion, but the email that Jennifer Rubin sent to them is completely is an email that just bashes Politico for the most part. It begins like this: how utterly predictable that Politico would run the zillionth hit piece on a prominent woman, especially one candid in her critiques of Politico's hysterical clickbait style of coverage.
Okay.
So it almost reads like a statement to Politico.
Right.
This is not something that's necessarily really addressing many of the claims in the article. That's just funny to me. All right. Not guilty. By the way, Joe Perticone tweets this as a journo turned flack. Another thing I would add is that off the record, no comment is just about the worst thing you can say. So what if you go to somebody and say, like, hey, do you have a comment? They say, off the record, I have no comment. What do you do with that? I think you're still free to say they had no comment.
It's a statement of fact. Yeah, I think that's okay.
That'll be for a future edition of Journalism Small Claims Court. But we got one more case for today, David. The case of Dan Clark and paying for podcasts.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
The plaintiffs, in this case, every living person on sports Twitter, they ratioed a baseball analyst named Dan Clark, who revealed that he charges people $50 to $100 to appear on their podcasts. The defendant, Dan Clark himself, who tweeted this, he says, I guess my question is, do people just expect shit for free nowadays? Why should I invest 2+ hours of my time and not be remunerated for it? And goes on to say that I spent at least an hour prepping for a podcast, followed by a 25 to 30-minute discussion. I also promote the appearance both pre and post recording to help grow their following. There, meaning the person who has the podcast.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we feel about somebody asking for $100 or $50 or any fee to appear on someone else's podcast?
Well, I mean, you can't blame somebody for trying.
No, suppose not.
Certainly in the modern media world, there have been innumerable cases where someone is offered self-promotion in a sort of backhanded way, right, as an excuse for not paying them in an instance where someone would normally get paid. This does feel a little bit extreme. I mean, just because I guess I don't thoroughly disagree with it on the merits, although this isn't like a new media thing where you're trying out a new technology. I mean, this is just going on a radio show, right? This is something that sports writers have been doing for ages. I might take exception to the notion that he, preps for any significant length of time before going on a podcast, but I've never listened to him on a podcast. So who am I to say?
Well, let's take him at his word that he's spending a lot of time, not just on the podcast, but getting ready for the podcast.
I can kind of feel both sides of this. I mean, it seems really pretentious and presumptuous, and it seems like just antithetical to the entire construct of this thing. And yet, if someone wants to say no unless you give me $50, I mean, I don't think they're breaking any laws.
No. I mean, I sort of thought of it this way. If you're a writer who's doing well for yourself and you're charging someone who has a podcast who is just starting out and trying to make their way in the world,
yeah,
that seems bad.
Well, sure, and the co-promotional aspect of it, I tweeted out, I try to build their audiences. I mean, you should do that for people that you feel strongly about, that you would do that for sort of anyway. I mean, that's obviously the ideal situation here. I go on a podcast that I enjoy or I like the hosts and want to do something for them, right? You shouldn't necessarily need remuneration for such a thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do come back to your point about the whole idea of, many times in recent history, we've said, look, websites have asked somebody to write for free or asked them to write for an absurdly small fee.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason those websites gave was, hey, this will be great for you.
Yeah.
You're getting a lot of promotion out of this. This will be great for your career. And then somebody else will pay you.
Right.
Well, I think a lot of us have decided that that's bad. So we say, well, you need to come on the podcast and not compensate you for your time. Like, is that different? I mean, on the one hand, if it's just a 10-minute hit about something you already wrote, I guess so. But it's just, I don't know that I see a whole lot of, if we're just doing it through that moral lens. And again, let's assume in this case, it's a podcaster who's making money and has ads and, is having is getting paid to podcast. Is there something totally wrong with that? Again, I wouldn't ask for it myself, but if we're talking about this whole thing, I also think, and